One.
All right, welcome to the new JFK show number 134. We're going to go ahead and flip our half-hour hourglass and get the show rolling. So I'm still suffering from my eye palsy, but I'm going to go ahead and let Don work the PowerPoint tonight. So Don Fox is in the engineer's chair. We have Dr. Fetzer, of course, and then myself, and we're going to take you to places where no one else will go.
That is correct. Okay, so yeah, I've got the finger here tonight that's going to push the button and move the slides, so I can talk and push at the same time. You know, how many shows do you have a guy that talented, huh? Okay, so, all right, so one thing that's come up over the years in JFK research is the role of the Federal Reserve in what happened in Dealey Plaza. And, you know, there's a lot of confusion about Executive Order 11,111. 1111. Was that behind? Did that play a role in Kennedy's ouster? The silver certificates. Just what exactly was going on with all that? So we'll take a look here at the a little overview of the Fed itself, and then more on Kennedy versus the Fed. So hopefully we all learned something here tonight. Okay, so. We're going to start out with an article I came across a few years ago by Dean Henderson. Dean is a very underrated guy. He's got some excellent stuff on banking and the Fed. He had a series that was on globalresearch.ca and also on his blog. It was called the Federal Reserve Cartel, and this was the first article in that series. And we'll read an excerpt of that, and then we'll cover some other stuff. So this is the Federal Reserve Cartel, the 8 families. So the 4 horsemen of banking, and that's what we're going to talk about here. The 4 horsemen of banking, Bank of America, J.P. Morgan Chase, Citigroup, and Wells Fargo, own the 4 horsemen of oil, who we see in the picture here. ExxonMobil, Royal Dutch Shell, BP, and Chevron Texaco. In tandem with Deutsche Bank, BNP, Barclays, and other European old money behemoths. But their monopoly over the global economy does not end at the edge of the oil patch. According to company 10K filings to the SEC, the 4 horsemen of banking are among the top 10 stockholders of virtually every Fortune 500 corporation. So who then are the stockholders in these money-centered banks? Now that information is guarded much more closely. My queries, Dean Henderson, to bank regulatory agencies regarding stock ownership in the top 25 U.S. bank holding companies were given Freedom of Information Act status before being denied on national security grounds. This is rather ironic since many of the bank stockholders reside in Europe. One important repository for wealth in the global oligarchy that owns these banking holding companies is U.S. Trust Corporation. Founded in 1853 and now owned by Bank of America, a recent U.S. Trust Corporation corporate director and honorary trustee was Walter Rothschild. Other directors include Daniel Davison of J.P. Morgan Chase, Richard Tucker of ExxonMobil, Daniel Roberts of Citigroup, and Marshall Schwartz of Morgan Stanley. J.W. McAllister, an oil industry insider with House of Saud connections, wrote in the Grim Reaper that information he acquired from Saudi bankers cited 80% ownership of the New York Federal Reserve Bank by far the most powerful Fed branch by just 8 families, 4 of which reside in the U.S. They are Goldman Sachs, Rockefellers, Lehmans, Kuhn Loebs of New York, Rothschilds of Paris and London, the Warburgs of Hamburg, the Lazards of Paris, and the Israel Moses Seifs of Rome. So we see...
That's fairly astonishing all by itself, Don, that only 8 families control the Fed, which is a printing press.
Yeah, they control the New York branch of the Fed, which basically is the Fed, yeah. So all that power the power to create money resides in just those few families, yeah. Okay, so then for a little more background, like, well, how did this Federal Reserve come into being? What was the story behind it? And as we see there was quite a few Jewish families. In fact, it's all Jewish families involved in it. So I went over to
The Rockefellers are Jewish too?
yes, they are. Yeah. Their real name appears to be Rogenfelder. They started out in I think Spain, and then they went to Turkey, and then they came to America. Nobody's really sure how they acquired all that wealth, but there's a lot of speculation they're a front organization for the Rothschilds. So I went to another website I hit several times a year, is forward.com, the Jewish Forward.
Yes.
And so we'll give their side of the story here a little bit. So kind of the Jewish spin on the Fed. And this is on forward.com. It's FORWARD, so no E in there. Paul Moritz Warburg, a German Jewish immigrant who was one of the founding fathers of the U.S. Federal Reserve, had a fervent wish that his creation would be seen as one of America's great monuments, like the old cathedrals of Europe. Warburg's dream that the Fed would become a cherished American institution has never looked more in doubt. The Federal Reserve, which was enacted in 1913 and set up shop the following year, is today an institution under siege. And here's our guy, Paul Warburg.
Should I be ringing the bell?
Yeah, yeah, I was going to say, yeah, this would be a good time to hit your bell. The Federal Reserve, which was enacted by Congress in 1913 and set up shop the following year, is today an institution under siege. More surprising, perhaps, is that the Fed is refighting partisan and ideological battles that Warburg and other founders thought they had settled a century ago. Warburg was born into a wealthy banking family, proprietors of M.M. Warburg in Hamburg in 1868. The third of five brothers, he was groomed to run the bank, yet he found the details of commerce tedious and was repelled by the coarser elements of banking, such as stock speculation. Introspective and brooding, he became active in a local commercial court and in the city council, evidence of his latent interest in politics. In 1895, Warburg married Nina Loeb, scion of the Kuhn-Loeb banking family in New York. They settled in Hamburg, but Nina yearned to be near her parents. In 1902, they relocated to New York, with Warburg joining the in-laws firm. Warburg was stunned by the primitive condition of American banking. Not long after he arrived, interest rates in New York's chaotic money market soared to 100%. Quote,
100%?
yes. That is true, too. They're not lying to you there. I was not there but 3 weeks, Warburg said. Before I was trying to explain myself to the roots of the evil. So what you had then was decentralization of the money supply. Regional banks would flood the market with money, and then they would cut the supply off at certain times. And so there was a lot of up and downs with the financial system.
The old margin recall.
Yep, yeah. They would all of a sudden one day they'd go, hey, we gotta call in all your outstanding, all your margin. Yep.
Yeah, believe it or not, on your credit cards and any loan that you have, they still have that ability to pull it in at any time.
They do. Yep. And Warburg quickly concluded that the fault lay in America's lack of a central bank. Most other industrialized nations had a central bank, which acted as a storehouse of reserves or surplus credit for the entire nation. In addition, the central bank acted as a lender of last resort, supplying liquidity in times of stress. In America, by contrast, each bank was responsible for its own reserves. In times of financial stress, each bank, seeking to protect itself, would pull back on credit, accentuating the general scarcity, thus causing interest rates to soar. Money shortages and panics were common. Depressions were not infrequent. After his arrival, Warburg wrote a paper calling for a central bank similar to the one in his native Germany. Jacob Schiff, Warburg's brother-in-law and senior partner at Kuhn-Loeb, showed the paper to James Stillman, head of National City, the country's biggest bank. A few days later, Stillman paid Warburg a visit. They had a testy exchange. Warburg said that in the next panic, Stillman would regret the lack of a central bank. Stillman left in a huff.
Yeah. Hey, Don.
Yeah.
This is one of the original false flags, right? In other words, if you don't think we need a central bank, we're going to wreck the market time after time after time until you falsely believe that we need a central bank to stop all this from happening.
Well,
it's like 9/11 in the banking world.
Well, this stuff was going on, long before Warburg did show up on the scene. It was these regional banks would flood the market with money, then cut back on credit, and then they would generally gain more power, and then that allowed the bigger banks to swallow up the smaller banks.
Yeah, buying on pennies on the dollar.
Yeah, but these panics, though, what the story doesn't here obviously tell you is that those regional banks were also owned by other Jews. So Warburg had stumbled upon the original American conflict. Oh, okay. So need to back up a bit here. So Stillman left in a huff. Schiff warned Warburg not to show his paper to anyone. The American people, Schiff explained, quote, do not want to centralize power. They do not want to have this massive deposits controlled by a few people, unquote. Warburg had stumbled upon the original American conflict, debated first by Hamilton and Jefferson, of federalism versus anti-federalism. Indeed, the young republic twice experimented with the national bank, and even though each attempt was successful, each of these banks was abandoned. President Andrew Jackson, who abolished the second bank, personified the mistrust common among rural Americans of government banks. He thought the second bank was a tool of moneyed elites, just as populists today accuse the Fed of favoring Wall Street. Alexis de Tocqueville, who visited the U.S. during Jackson's reign, was baffled. He wrote that Americans were, quote, obsessed with a fear of centralization. For Warburg, overcoming this obsession became a crusade. He wrote numerous papers urging the adoption of a central bank. To him, America's banking system resembled a town in which each household had a backyard well, but lacked a general water supply. It would not suffice for putting out fires. So in 1913, we got the Fed. It was passed on Christmas Eve, and there's some debate about whether it was ever actually ratified correctly or whatever. But I mean, in all intents and purposes, it's not going anywhere.
Yeah, it was not ratified by the proper number of states.
Yeah, and okay, so forward.com, of course, they're going to give you kind of a pro-Jewish spin on the thing, but they're right in the fact that the Fed did act to stabilize the economy somewhat. But at what price? They basically, when you have a central bank that big, this is what Jackson Fair was, it basically owns everything. Everything in the United States now has been monetized. When you're born, your real birth certificate goes over to the Treasury Department, who then sends it over to the Fed, and then the Fed issues the Treasury Department a loan for X amount of dollars against the amount of taxes.
It's $650,000 when your baby's born. They cut a check right there, send it, and then you're going to pay for that with your back over your expected lifetime of 65 years. That's the story.
Yeah, so you're owned, basically before your feet hit the floor. You're owned. They own everything in the country. Now, is that price, is that worth avoiding a few depressions or recessions? It's debatable, but obviously we can see the Federal Reserve has probably not been the greatest thing this country's ever seen. So, okay, so then we'll go on to a different point of view here. Michael Collins Piper's Final Judgment. I've got a couple of excerpts here. Here's the remind you again, the key to their wealth and power over us is the ability to create money out of nothing. Technically, it's not out of nothing. They like to say they monetize everything, but the amount of total wealth on the planet has basically been, the latest estimate I heard was maybe 66 or 70 trillion. And A lot of these banks
It
have
is striking that the key to their wealth and power is their ability to create money out of nothing
thing.
and then to lend it to us at interest. That
Yes.
is the key. That really is the key.
And lend it to us at interest, yes, because usury is probably the greatest crime ever, because that's the one. Usury, from that's where all the rest of it stems.
It's how you buy your politicians. How much is a politician? A congressman, I heard, is about $250,000. You can get them to do whatever you want. So that's nothing if you print it out of nothing. And so you can see any candidate that they don't really want, they can really pour the money on and usually get their way, but not every single time.
Yeah, their batting average is pretty good, though.
Yeah, I would say so.
They know what they're doing. Okay, so we'll go to final judgment, I think. Okay, that's Wilson was the guy who signed it into law. And he later did regret it.
Constructive acts to aid business.
Yes, yep. That's how it was. This is how it was sold back in the day. What was the next one? Yeah, there's Woodrow Wilson. Okay, I am a most unhappy man. I accidentally ruined my country. Great industrial nation is now controlled by its system of credit. So Woodrow Wilson did, as we can see here, he grew to regret
that he's the one.
Yeah, they did kind of put a gun to
this out.
You know, yeah, more or less. Yeah, Andrew Jackson fought basically to the death against the central bankers, and Woodrow Wilson did fall victim to them. Okay, so here we go. Okay, that's the right slide. Okay, so now we'll go to final judgment. And here's Piper on page 100. This is an interesting quip you don't hear much of in Kennedy research. So from page 100, it's a section entitled "The Money Monopoly." There is no question, however, but that JFK, once firmly established in the presidency, fully intended to move against the Federal Reserve money monopoly. In fact, during his private meeting with DeWest Hooker, described earlier in these pages, JFK's father, Ambassador Joseph P. Kennedy, assured Hooker that the ultimate long-term aim of the Kennedy dynasty would be the destruction of what the senior Kennedy described as, quote, the Rothschild-dominated Federal Reserve, unquote. This alone could have assured Kennedy's removal from the White House. However, there were other more immediate and ultimately dangerous conflicts at work between the forces whose influence JFK sought to dismantle in the hard-driving new Kennedy administration. Then
Meyer Lansky, David Ben-Gurion,
yep.
James Jesus Angleton, Bobby, Jack, and who on the right?
That's the father.
Oh, Joe Kennedy.
Right.
Joe.
Is that Joe Kennedy or is that?
I'm not sure. Who it looks like to me, I could be wrong.
It could be, yeah. I think it probably is. Yeah. Okay, and so here's kind of the nuts and bolts of this. Is we'll get into the executive order 11,110. So at JFK, so now we're on page 444 of final judgment. JFK's greenbacks: the truth about the Federal Reserve connection, a grain of truth and much misinformation. The story that, quote, the Federal Reserve killed JFK, unquote, is part of the lore in the JFK assassination conspiracy controversy. At the same time, however, there is much misinformation about this subject, and here I will attempt to address the issue. So, essentially, at issue is whether Executive Order 11,110, signed by JFK on June 4th, 1963, and supposedly repealed by LBJ within hours of JFK's death, approved more than $4 billion in U.S. notes, issued directly by the Treasury, in place of Federal Reserve notes, which earn interest for the Federal Reserve banks. So that's kind of the common spin, but in fact, it was the Reagan administration, not LBJ, that finally repealed Executive Order 11,110, and this executive order dealt with silver certificates, not greenbacks, when Reagan signed Executive Order 12,608, which revoked several outdated executive orders. Executive Order 11,110 dealt with granting the Secretary of the Treasury the authority to issue rules and regulations pertaining to the freeing the Secretary to act without presidential approval on silver bullion sales. As President, JFK revoked both of these with Executive Order 11,110. To repeat, the issuance of greenbacks, technically known as United States notes, was not even the subject of Kennedy's Executive Order 11,110. The greenbacks that were issued during the Kennedy administration were issued pursuant to longstanding federal regulation mandating that a certain number of U.S. notes always be in circulation by the Treasury Department, although, as we shall see momentarily, the Treasury has not been following that mandate. For those not well versed in the intricacies of finance and the Federal Reserve controversy, here's a brief description of U.S. notes as written by the late Gertrude Coogan, a longtime student of the money question. Quote, U.S. notes are the kind of money for which the private banker is not charging the taxpayer's interest. They are real money and pass today as full legal tender. If all the money in use in the country were issued by the United States government, we would not have periods in which the volume of money suddenly diminished or for some mysterious reason. U.S. notes draw no interest on their creation, and they cannot be recalled. In short, U.S. notes provide no profit for the private banking interests, whereas Federal Reserve notes do. However, for the record, we will cite here the correct explanation as to why, 1, U.S. notes were indeed issued during the Kennedy era, and 2, why U.S. notes appeared now to be withdrawn from circulation. The fact is that an act of Congress passed on May 31st, 1878 declared the U.S. Treasury is required to keep $322,539,016 in U.S. notes in circulation at all times. However, as a Treasury Department officer, Rudy Villarreal, then director of the Currency Operation Division at the Treasury Department, admitted to the Spotlight in a 1982 interview the Treasury itself was not issuing the U.S. notes into circulation, even though it was mandated to do so by the long-standing congressional legislation. He said the U.S. notes were put in the so-called issue vault, but as the Spotlight commented, it would appear that by some sort of semantic wizardry, the bureaucrats consider these locked-up notes to qualify as circulating currency. In fact, it does appear that the last time the U.S. notes were introduced into the economy was during the Kennedy administration. But to repeat, it was done not by a special executive order issued by the president that is so often cited by those who say the Federal Reserve killed JFK. Instead, the issuance of the U.S. notes during the Kennedy era was done in pursuant of a law already on the books. For those who cite the executive order by JFK, that in fact refers to silver certificates, are making a big mistake and, unintentionally or not, are doing a disservice to serious research in the JFK assassination conspiracy. I cannot overemphasize this fact. So Kennedy didn't order the Treasury Department to create the U.S. notes. He just made them do what they were supposed to do and issue them. And ever since Kennedy, technically those notes are still in circulation, but they're in a vault called the circulation vault that nobody can get to.
The circulation vault, they actually have to.
That's what they call, that's what they call it, a circulation vault.
It's a farce.
Exactly, yeah. It's like the Ministry of Truth or something. It's an oxymoron, yeah. So no, those U.S. notes are still supposed to be in circulation to this day by congressional order, but nobody makes the Treasury Department actually do it. Kennedy was the last guy to actually make them do it.
Yeah, I believe this was one of the fusions of reasons, but we can't forget about the letter to Ben-Gurion stating that there will be nuclear weapons inspections, just like they do Iran now. And John Kennedy was standing in the way of the greater Israel, and he had to go. They had to get nuclear weapons, and he was not going to allow it.
Yeah, I think nukes were a bigger motivation than the money supply, at least at this juncture of Kennedy's presidency.
Well, he was poking a lot of people in the toe now, with a
yes, he was. I think the battle with the Fed was maybe going to really get serious in his second term. That's kind of, there's no way to prove that because he's gone. He never lived to serve a second term. But
well, just as he was going to pull our troops out of Vietnam after his reelection.
Yeah, I mean,
he already issued the order, but he was going to be emphatic thereafter.
It's kind of like NSAM 263, where he says, "Hey, all the troops are coming out," and then NSAM 274 comes out, and all the troops go flooding back in.
Yeah, LBJ doing his thing, no doubt. Well, it appears that Donald Trump's experiencing what JFK did. They wanted to go to war with Cuba so bad they couldn't stand it, and now it seems that they want to go to war with Iran so much that they can barely stand it. So it appears that Donald Trump is going to be following through with the demonization of Iran.
I certainly hope you're wrong, Gary, because this would be a calamity. I mean, he's got to get a grip on the history of this situation. All 16 U.S. intel agencies concluded in 2007 that Iran had abandoned its projects to develop nuclear weapon in 2003. They reaffirmed that conclusion in 2011. Even the Mossad came on board in 2012, just 3 weeks before Bibi Netanyahu went to the UN and asserted the opposite. This is a very bad sign. The Iran deal was one of the few good moves by the Obama administration to work out a solution to a non-existent nuclear weapons program. And if the Donald subverts it, that will be a tragedy.
Yeah, Don, you want to stop screen share so I can play a video real quick?
Yep, you bet. Let's see.
You have more slides, Don?
No.
Okay.
I don't want to leave the meeting.
No, just undo the screen share.
Stop share. There we go. Okay.
All right. Now I'm going to hit it. Okay.
So now Gary's in control.
Yeah.
I've lost control of the meeting.
Okay. Here we go. I just wanted to play this clip so we could discuss it.
Recent Iranian actions involving a provocative ballistic missile launch and an attack against a Saudi naval vessel conducted by Iran-supported Houthi militants underscore what should have been clear to the international community all along about Iran's destabilizing behavior across the entire Middle East. The recent ballistic missile launch is also in defiance of UN Security Council Resolution 2231, which calls upon Iran not to undertake any activity related to ballistic missiles designed to be capable of delivering nuclear weapons, including launches using such ballistic missile technology. These are just the latest of a series of incidents in the past 6 months in which Houthi forces that Iran has trained and armed have struck Emirati and Saudi vessels and threatened United States and allied vessels transiting the Red Sea. In these and other similar activities, Iran continues to threaten U.S. friends and allies in the region. The Obama administration failed to respond adequately to Tehran's malign actions, including weapons transfers, support for terrorism, and other violations of international norms. The Trump administration condemns such actions by Iran that undermine security, prosperity, and stability throughout and beyond the Middle East, and which places American lives at risk. President Trump has severely criticized the various agreements reached between Iran and the Obama administration, as well as the United Nations, as being weak and ineffective. Instead of being thankful to the United States in these agreements, Iran is now feeling emboldened. As of today, we are officially putting Iran on notice. Thank you.
I just can't believe that Iran's bombing everything in sight and doing everything they can to get the United States riled up.
Iran is, and it's ridiculous. And the development of their missile system is perfectly within the scope of the agreement. They're entitled to develop their conventional defensive capabilities. Every nation has the right of self-defense, including Iran. Iran is a peace-loving country that hasn't launched an aggressive war since 1775. And if we're going to have the new government this ignorant about the history of the Middle East, we're in deep, deep trouble.
There's one country in the Middle East that's destabilizing all countries around the planet,
Yeah.
And it's not Iran.
Yes.
It's not Iran.
It's not even a Muslim country, whether Shia or Sunni. I sometimes wonder if Trump even understands the difference that it's a Sunni, especially the Wahhabists from Saudi Arabia, who are the principals in relation to ISIS, and that the Iranians and other peace-loving Muslims are Shia. If he doesn't understand that, we don't have a ghost of a chance. And frankly, at this point in time, I don't believe he does understand that.
Yeah, I mean, this is a complete false flag. You can tell that every word of that report's a lie. And now they're saying that Trump's going to get serious about it. It does appear that as far as militarily and expanding the greater good, he's working for Israel.
I don't like that idea, Gary, but I can't find a good reason to reject it.
Well, on the good news front, though, this week, Trump has done a ton of good stuff, in his first few days in office.
Yes.
Building the wall, the Muslim ban. Look, if you live in the Minneapolis area here, this Somali ban could not be more welcomed. This town is full of them, and they're not compatible with white society. They aren't. They've got 70.
They're not compatible with a civilized society.
Correct. Yes.
White, black, any color you want to name. But the point is, these are primitive people.
Yeah, they have no business driving cabs and trying to do corporate cube jobs. It's ridiculous. There's maybe 1 in 1,000 of them that are really capable of doing anything. They're getting rid of them. By definition, you're moving to strengthen your society. The reason these people are here in the first place is because of our friends in Israel.
And George Soros.
Yeah, George Soros is Jewish. Yes, he's a Jew. And their thing is to destabilize all civilizations. This goes all the way back to Rousseau, and it goes back to Adam Weishaupt and the Illuminati. They're all about destroying civilization. That's what the Jews are up to.
They're in full force as far as destabilizing the U.S. right now. There's a protest every time you turn around, and they seem to be pretty well attended. So
yeah, they seem to be pretty well funded too, Gary.
Yes, yeah. I mean,
for example, the Women's March, Soros was funding 50 of the societies that were involved in that.
Well, that goes back to what the show's about. When you allow to just print money, you can print money for stuff like this. If these guys would have to use their own money, you know how that story goes. They wouldn't spend a dime.
But when they're creating when the money gets created out of thin air, this is how you get the streets flooded with idiots. I mean, and these protesters, they don't have any demands. They're not saying, hey, this is what we want, X, Y, or Z. They're just saying, like these women say, we want Trump to know we're not going anywhere. Well, were there plans to deport all the women in the country?
Yeah. I'm marching for civil rights and women's rights. Well, have you lost any lately? I've never seen a more clueless group of people at these protests. I've actually gone to a couple of them with Battle New Orleans, and they're not really saying anything.
They're just
pink hats with the horns. Just looks ridiculous. I mean, what are y'all trying to prove running around with pink hats on?
Yeah.
Well,
it's all about destabilization. That's what's really behind these protests.
All right. So what has Trump done that is, besides the wall, it seems like he's got the stock market through the roof.
Yeah, well, remember the Jewish agenda is one world government, so that means no nations. The Jewish war is against the nation state itself. So this is why you see Europe being flooded. There cannot be national boundaries. Just by Trump proclaiming that the United States is a country and it has boundaries, that is in direct opposition to the Jewish agenda. Direct opposition. This wall.
Well, I think Trump is being a massive force against globalism.
Yep.
Getting rid of the TPP, renegotiating NAFTA, putting in the borders, tightening up immigration. He's making a lot of steps in the right direction.
I guess we have to accept that. Obama never took one step in our direction.
Obama was a total waste. We had 8 years of no leadership at all.
Complete destruction, complete surveillance state. In New Orleans right now, they've assigned 200 more red light cameras, and on top of that, they now have the mobile photo enforcement vehicles in New Orleans. So they have these cars that just go park at different places in the city, and they just move around and they just take a photo of you, and you get it in the mail. It's $178.
For what?
Tickets, yeah, they banned
Red
that
light
here.
tickets or cameras,
Yeah,
speeding
there's red light cameras. Yeah, they banned that stuff here.
Not in New Orleans. I mean, we are a New World Order city, big time, and they've got our Mayor Mitch Landrieu has sold us out to every program. The Superdome is nothing but a surveillance. There's an actual program that we're one of 7 cities that it actually sucks the information out of your cell phone as you walk by, going around.
What are they expecting we're going to do, for God's sake, that justifies all this surveillance?
Well, that's everybody likes their smartphone, but when you bring that into a store, you've got all these apps on there. A lot of these apps are phoning home, and they can tell what aisle you're going up and down. And if you stop at a certain spot and look at certain merchandise or whatever.
God forbid.
If you go to the Superdome, there's a big, huge speaker, and it's talking with nothing but and they also have the sniffing dogs going around before you go into the Saints game. And they're saying, that all suspicious activity will be reported and blah, blah, blah. I don't even like to go to the Saints games really anymore. There's just so much propaganda. It's all about being a war hero, and they always put the flag across the field, and they show how bombing all these countries is a heroic thing to do. I mean, the NFL is the worst.
Shall we abbreviate our meeting tonight?
Yeah, I think we were going to do that.
Don,
that's fine with me. Yeah, I got what I had to say out.
Fair enough.
But
Gary, we hope you rapidly recover from your eye palsy.
Yeah, I do too. People tell me it looks a little better than last week. I really hope so. I mean, it's not much fun seeing double, but I just hope that it goes away.
You want to sign us out? Sure
will. All right. We didn't use up our whole hourglass, but that's okay. We'll see you next week. This has been JFK, the new JFK show. See you later, Don, Jim, and we'll have Larry next week.